evening, everyone. I think we'll make a start while everyone starts rolling in. So welcome to the first event for the year for the women of ABP. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people, as well as the traditional owners of the land you are situated on, and acknowledge that Indigenous Australians have been custodian of the lands and waterways of Australia for thousands of years. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It's very exciting to have you all back this year for our first event of 2021, even though we're on Zoom. Tonight, we're going to be exploring the topic, the future of smart cities. Is it smart or dumb? The concept of efficiently run smart cities driven by increasingly powerful data networks has dominated much of the conversation around how urban conglomerations might develop in the future. However, smart cities have come with their own set of challenges, from data privacy and surveillance issues to concerns around technology maintenance, costs, and the complexities of managing immense IT systems that run our entire city. Tonight, our speakers will examine the idea, is the future of our ever-growing cities smart, dumb, or a combination of both? We have several keen debaters here tonight. For the affirmative, we have Claire Parry, the Better Buildings lead at HIP v Hype. Claire seeks to provide advice on improving health, comfort, and efficiency outcomes for our built environment. She believes that our buildings should serve without detracting from living systems that we're a part of. Claire seeks to harness opportunities and consider constraints to deliver low carbon, more efficient integrated outcomes. Our second speaker for the affirmative, MADELYN. MADELYN EADS-DORSEY, a project management and delivery manager at City of Stonington. MADELYN oversees a team of 22 project managers, engineers, and landscape architects who collectively deliver 70 million in capital works throughout the City of Stonington each year. She enjoys working in local government where even small projects make a huge impact on people. For the negative, we have Rebecca Finn, Director at Urbanfold. Rebecca is an urban designer and registered landscape architect with significant experience in the design of cities, towns, and neighbourhoods across Australia and North America. She launched Urbanfold in 2020, a Melbourne-based urban design studio with a simple aim to design places that elevate urban life. The second speaker for the negative, Tim O'Loan, Director of Cities at ACOM. Tim leads ACOM's Cities program across Australia and New Zealand, which seeks to unlock urban critical infrastructure opportunities within our priority cities. Most recently, Tim is focused on the Fisherman's Bend Employment and Innovation District and the Melbourne Cricket Ground Deck Concept Project. So welcome to the panellists. The debate will be moderated by our very own Estella, followed by some Q&A from the audience where we can answer all your questions that you posted in the registrations. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Estella.
Thanks, Justine. I'd just like to say it's really great to see you all come and join us tonight. This is a really interesting topic to me. I have an urban planning background, and I think the concept of smart cities comes up from time to time, and it is a very interesting and divisive topic. So really great to see such a great panel lined up to debate the merits of a smart city. I may get started and go around the panelists and, just ask, what does a smart city look like to you? I know there's no definitive definition of a smart city, and everyone's got a different understanding and definition. So maybe Beck, would you like to start us off with what you think a smart city is?
Oh my gosh, I just failed the question.
Someone had to do it.
People were talking, but I'll try to get back into it. Thanks, Estella, and thanks for being part of, inviting me to be part of this. I think I just want to start with talking about Sidewalk Labs, the Toronto Waterfront redevelopment project that's actually already been mentioned tonight. There was huge fanfare when that development was announced a few years ago. It was sort of going to change everything about the way that we developed our cities, and yet 3 years down the track, the whole project is already on ice. So my argument, for the sake of this debate, and I will say that when Tim and I were talking about this, we realised that we had to take sort of a harder line on the concept of smart cities than we actually have personally. But the argument that we'll make is that about sidewalk labs is that although it offered really good design and streets of people and affordable housing, etc., 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 it was overly reliant on technology, and that's why it failed. So, Estelle, should I continue? This is the 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Maybe you can embellish on what you've discussed further on.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right.
Great. Thanks, Beck. Thanks so much. Maybe we'll move on to an affirmative. Madeline, what does a smart city look like to you?
So I think that the smart cities movement is real. It's been around for a while now, and things like smart cities initiatives, the Internet of Things, having a council dedicated to Smart Cities Council of Australia and New Zealand, and embedding smart cities departments within city councils is a great initiative, because otherwise, if things aren't embedded within those governance structures, then things don't change. They don't happen organically. So yes, I think smart cities are here to stay, but I think now that they're maturing, the real question is not, smart or dumb, but it's how smart. And it's about how are we going to make changes based on the data that we collect. So I really see smart cities as a data collection, and it's about making those key decisions around changes around that data.
Great, thanks, Madeline. Let's move back to Tim. Did you want to give us your feel on what a smart city looks like to you?
The negative, taking the sledgehammer to this smart cities idea. I think, look, smart cities, as we understand it at the moment, is, I think, besotted quite a lot by the technology, which is fantastic. Technology through the millennia, when we've had cities, has been incredibly important. But I think there's 2 other aspects as well. There's the tolerance, there's the acceptance of equality, there's the need to understand that a city is made up of people, of human beings, that technology is a tool to effectively assist. So I think we do phase in and out of an understanding. I think that the second part of that is, the talent that people inherently have within their organisation, within their cities. So it's the collective thought of the mindset or the will of the people. And I think, as Madeline just pointed out, one aspect of that, or 1/3 of that equation to make that work, is the technology. But we need to focus on the other 2 parts, the talent and the humanity of a city as well.
Great, thanks, Tim. And Claire, for the affirmative, what's your take?
Yeah, okay. So I was actually I was hoping to be put on the negative side, because I actually thought that I would be on the negative side of this argument, but the more I've dug into it, I actually feel like we're going to converge tonight, but let's see how we go. So yeah, the smart city definition, or my understanding and appreciation, and the way that I would apply the definition of it, is that a smart city is something that serves people. And it could be, we do get caught up in the tech, but I think it's a lot about the systems and about how we use that. So like Madeline was sort of introducing, it's not just how is it smart, and not just how is it smart, but how smart is it? And how do we use that data, and how do all those systems talk to each other, and how does that serve us? So coming back again to the people, how do we take those layers and that information and actually use it to enhance our cities for the people that live in them?
Great, thanks so much, Claire. I think whether affirmative or negative, all 4 of you have touched on the people element and the technological element, and I guess it's just really the convergence, and as Madeline said, how smart is a smart city? I might move on to the next question. What are your favourite examples of international smart cities, and do you think we can Australian cities? So Beck, I think that ties in well to your point about sidewalk labs in Toronto.
I think that the smart city for me is is more than technology. You know, smart city has to tie into good design and resilience and creativity. And so I guess when I look to oversee examples of smart cities, they're still the cities that are my favorite are still the cities that have beautifully designed cities. So I guess it just comes and have full of places for people and places that I want to hang out. So I wouldn't say that I have a single favorite smart city, but I will say that I think cities should not become slaves to technology. That there's still all of these other factors in the design of cities that are just as important. That technology is sort of one tool that we have in our toolbox to create fantastic cities all around the world.
No, definitely. And you make me think. A lot of my favorite cities I visited, they're not smart at all. You go there to see the organic, the old. There's nothing fancy. There's no fancy technology or big high rises. It's the really humble, organic elements that make me like them. Great, thanks, Beck. Madeline, do you have any favorite smart cities?
I don't have any. Yeah, I'm the same. I don't have any favorite smart cities, but I would say that almost every city now, including the city that I work for, the city of Stonington, has a smart city officer or a smart city program. So smart cities are, definitely here to stay, I would say. And viewing things through a smart cities lens is really just another way to help solve cities' biggest issues. And every city is dealing with their own issues. So I actually consulted with our Smart Cities officer, Goran, who I think might be in attendance tonight before this. And he said that he's consulted with many, many cities to understand their programs and what they're implementing under the Smart Cities banner. And his really good insight is that every city is just trying to solve what they see their biggest issue is. So he gave the example of Hobart. Hobart, the biggest issue there is attracting and retaining young people. And so they are using smart cities initiatives to improve public transport and revitalize their nighttime economy. In the city of Stonington, we're using it to solve our biggest issues, which is traffic congestion, revitalizing Chapel Street, and managing our assets. So I can probably touch on that a bit later, but yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Madeline. And it's really interesting to have that perspective. A city isn't really just New York City or London or Barcelona or, Hong Kong. It could be, local government, the city of Stonington.
Yeah, and local government is really where these initiatives lie. We may hire consultants to help us with them, but this is what the budget is, yeah.
Okay, anyone in the audience looking for a job at a council, talk to Madeline. Claire, do you have any examples of smart cities?
I can't remember when I last travelled. Can anybody? But I've seen some great examples recently. Copenhagen springs to mind, and the way that they've used data. And I think every city is probably approaching this in a similar way, but they've got some great examples of systems that they've rolled out where they've been looking at transport and the way that they manage where there's a focus of population and how they use that information flow to, I guess, move people around, but also make sure that amenity exists in particular areas. So there's a new development happening in Copenhagen at the moment. And they've got an initiative where they're looking at that they need to make sure that there's a 5-minute, lifestyle that exists, which they call the good life. And it's only then that they start to, which I love, why not?
Right.
And it's only after that they start to, I guess, layer over this tech. But, the whole smarts of, new transport, waste systems, managing, carbon emissions, all of that sort of stuff, and energy, EVs, parking, availability of services. That's all coming out to play in these new developments, and Copenhagen is doing that really well.
Great. Thanks for your example. Tim?
I've got to say, just drawing together what the other speakers were talking about. It's almost, and I hate this term, the second cities within Australia. So, you know, outside of Sydney and Melbourne, and to a certain extent Brisbane, so Newcastle, Bendigo, Hobart, even Adelaide to a large extent. Geelong, yeah, Geelong, definitely. These are cities that have greater capability to be smart in the way that we've just been describing, and that to drive, I guess, livability means, which can be the esoteric, the sense of discovery, the delight, all the rest of it, as well as the hardcore livability metrics, you know, access to healthcare, transport, environment, etc. All of these things can be measured, but not only that, the thing that makes that tick, or the thing that makes it smart, is again that human intelligence, that consensus, because those, you know, the community, those groups who are concerned about that within those smaller cities are able to talk with each other. They don't drive off into, you know, separate neighborhoods or separate conversations. They are able to come together in terms of the, you know, the innovation ecosystems or innovation economies, the entrepreneurs who seek smaller cities. They're able to find support in that way. They're able to find like-minded people who want to translate, you know, the human aspiration of making their cities better, and use data as amongst other things to help make that happen. So, you know, some of the smartest cities, or some of the cities that have the capacity to be smarter, are right here in Australia.
Very interesting food for thought. Thanks,
I think I might have a rebuttal for that.
Oh,
go for it.
I think, you know, there's a lot to be said for, you know, smart people talking about things and working things out. But there comes a time where you can just talk yourself around in circles and never come to a position, or have so many opposing positions that you need something to really sink your teeth in. And I think data is something that can really help us drive initiatives that would normally get held up in bureaucracy or consultation. Yeah. And that is where smart cities really comes into play. You know, I think 3 things that I've learned that, you know, you never have enough resources, you can never make everyone happy, and everything's political. Data is how you can help yourself through those. And I think that, it's the way of the future, to kind of back up bigger picture, big blue sky ideas that people just normally wouldn't go for.
Yeah.
Great, thanks for that, Madeline. I think that ties in quite well to the next question. By the way, we had a really, really big list of questions, so I spent some of the week curating, cherry picking the most interesting ones. The next question is, how have smart city concepts contributed to the management of cities during the COVID pandemic? Madeline, that ties in quite well with what your last point was, and especially coming from the backgrounds of local government. How do you think your very smart city of Stonnington has contributed to the management during COVID?
Well, I'll just give one example for this. So we set up sensors during COVID in a lot of our public parks and on streets, and on a particular corner on Chapel Street, the corner of Chapel Street and Fitzgerald Street. And we could see that there was a lot more pedestrian traffic than vehicular traffic. And so when things started to open up again, we decided that we could use that data to temporarily close off Fitzgerald Street to traffic. And normally those sort of road closures would take a really long time, and you know, we're not the most agile organization. But because we had this data, and because, you know, commercial and retail outlets were struggling, and we wanted to do something to improve them, so the street curbside dining and all that, we were able to bring the data together, get the road closure through, and install a pop-up park. And we had really good community feedback. And then we continued to monitor it. We also used other indicators like place score, which is another way that we survey the community. And the place score went up. We could see that people were lingering longer, and therefore, you know, spending more money and helping revitalize that area.
It's a great example. Do any of the other panelists have any examples?
I would just add to that. I think that's a great example of where and this is for the sake of the debate, a great example of where data was used in quite a specific location. But I would sort of apply the that across the whole of Melbourne, and again think about the sort of broader definition of the smart city. And so I think that the curbside, the dining and outdoor dining that emerged after COVID, when there was a whole city of people, desperate to socialise. And I think that those, some very quick planning and some quick construction was allowed to happen all over the city, and the restaurants popped up everywhere within weeks of the lockdown finishing. And I think, for the most part, that didn't involve data collection. For the most part, it didn't involve technology. It just involved using our brains and thinking about human behaviour and some sort of quick planning and construction. And suddenly, the city emerged from the lockdown with these wonderful destinations and places to hang out. So I guess I can understand in some specific locations, data collection is very useful for making decisions about how to make changes in our city. But in lots of instances, and I think this is a really good example of that, it was just, I think that we can design our way out of a lot of these problems, and I think that the outdoor dining was a really good example of that.
Could I, sorry, just jumping in, and fair rebuttal, Mads. I think one particular example, and look, data is a tool, so you can back up your hypothesis, as Beck was saying, with a really smart application of data if you're able to collect it. And I think the big data aspect is fantastic as long as you apply the right kind of questions to that big data, but you need to have a preconceived idea. One quick little weird bit of data collection and probably drawing the wrong conclusions over COVID was in Melbourne, Metro Trains, their reliability of their services went up from around, I think it was 89% to around 99%, meaning their trains were far more reliable because there was nobody on them. And so their conclusion was that the reason why that the trains run late, 11 or 12% of the time is because of people. So if we get rid of the people, we'll have perfect attendance on the train. So these are it didn't actually lead to any revelation apart from, well, okay, yeah, because people hold the doors open and that's just what we've got to sort out. So there's, you have to ask, you have to apply, you have to have your question ready to ask the data and not the other way around. That's like.
Yeah, I reckon it's a bit unfair though to immediately say, well, I think there was a lot that we learned from COVID, but there are a lot of opportunities, like I refused to figure out what a QR code was until I really had to. And I had to last year, I got to say. But, none of us were more glued to data than we were last year. And it did help us get back up and running. And I think it will actually help us move forward as well. Like things like our smart cities will help us improve access to our buildings now as we come back online. And managing how we interact. But yeah, you're right. It shouldn't be the data driving the people. It should be the people driving the data, for sure.
Thanks, Claire. Do you foresee any major risks with a smart city? In, just drawing on the previous points in where data is used inappropriately or, to a rushed conclusion. Any risks that come to mind?
I think this sidewalk labs example case study is fascinating. That I'm sure there's so much information about it online, but so I'm sure everybody knows a lot about it. But it was owned by Sidewalk Labs is owned by Google's parent company Alphabet. So that you presume that Alphabet and Google weren't just developing this precinct out of the goodness of their heart. And you don't have to read very far into some of the articles about Sidewalk Labs to know that everything in that development was going to be monitored. There were going to be sensors everywhere, sort of collecting information constantly about the weather and crowds and road maintenance and everything. And so I guess it's fascinating that Alphabet had I think the big takeaway is that they weren't doing that out of the goodness of their heart. There was so much in there for them to get out of all that data collection. So I think the privacy aspects of the sort of technology-based data collection city are definitely real, and it's not something we've necessarily had to grapple yet with in Australia, but it will no doubt come.
Absolutely. I think the use of personal data is one of the major risks associated with a smart city. It's almost sinister hearing that case study, Beck.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that is a bit disturbing. Do you see any benefits of a smart city for the average person, aside from the risks?
I mean, of course, yes, of course, technology makes our life easier. And, I'd be lost without my phone, and, Tram Tracker is my favorite app. And so, yes, of course, but I think technology has to be used sort of, commensurate with everything else, that design and resilience and equality, and it has to be one tool in a toolbox of components that help us design great places and design great cities.
Absolutely. Any other benefits of the smart city from the affirmative or negative?
Well, I mean, from a building and construction and even infrastructure point of view, the data that goes into the whole process, and if we could empower better processes in designing better and faster and improving our supply chains, and then also enabling that information flow to go right through to facilitate a circular economy, there's huge benefits there. But I guess they are they're broader than the personal impacts, for sure. It's about deploying ideas and communicating benefits, and also sharing resources. So, things like data mining of cities, resource mining of cities is not going to be possible unless we have sort of that data that sits behind, that can sort of pull us back into that systems view of a city and help us to understand where things are, where things can go, and the processes that we need to implement. So I think it's going to be a big part of our climate change response, actually.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Claire said, that the data that we can capture on, our HVAC systems and our lighting. So if we have a sensor on lighting and we know that it's dead, we can go and we can replace it with a 10-year, warranty light globe. We can then, as technology advances, we can control them more specifically to exact times of day. We can save energy costs that way. We're already monitoring our aquatic centers. So we've got vibration sensors and heat sensors, and we can see when things aren't running efficiently. In our bins, there's those smart bins throughout the city of Melbourne and throughout the city of Stonington, and they tell us when they're full. So then they only have to be collected when they're full, and we're not wasting petrol driving around picking up bins that are empty. So there's so many benefits in the sustainability space for smart cities.
No, that's a great one. And I think those ones are the ones that might be more prone to being overlooked. I mean, the average person needs the garbage man to collect their bins. They go to the store. And you don't really think about what's in the background, what's council doing, what are the initiatives they're using. You think, Elon Musk and the big flashy things. But absolutely.
Yeah. Aquatic centers are huge, that's a huge source of gas and electricity. And if we can use smart cities and more resilient initiatives in those, we can have a really big impact on climate change.
Yeah, no, could I jump in? I think that part of the question was benefits of the smart city to the average person. And I think most of us, human society at the moment, this type of technology is really new to us. We haven't fully really absorbed what it can actually do. So, monitoring buildings, facilities managers, local governments, yes, we can start to see that, even certain politicians and other people who make, key decisions in our cities. But I think the average person, apart from the smartphone and being able to log in or do QR codes or whatever, sees a problem and then often small problems, technology then gets brought to it and it's a bit easier. But I think we haven't really properly understood and put it all together. I've got 2 daughters. They're in secondary school. They're far more aware of the combinations of technology that could solve problems that haven't existed yet. And they're also more aware of the problems that don't exist yet because of technology and how it proliferates. So I don't think the average person, including myself, really is aware of how many benefits there could be.
I think just to touch back on the drawbacks of the smart city, and I'm probably kind of arguing for the other team here, but it is about trust, and it's about we touched on the systems that we need to implement, but we need to implement the right systems, and if we end up having 15 different systems that don't talk to each other, it's actually like a huge waste. So it needs to be the right system. So it's about that how is it smart question we had at the start. And also if we think about, like, for the average person, data is now actually becoming a huge waste issue, and storing data. I've got probably 25,000 photos of my son since he was born, not that long ago. And, I probably won't look at 24,500 of them ever again. So, how do we deal with that waste? And I think that's where personal impact is going to come to the fore. We're paying for storage, but also we've got a huge carbon footprint. So these are things we need to address.
Speaking of smart, I've been sitting still for too long in the office and the light just went out. So I had to get up and stomp my foot on the ground. Back on. No, great. Yeah, very smart. But moving on to the next question, maybe Madeline, this is a good question for you. How do we assess gaps in legislation and or policy to adequately govern smart cities in sync with our technological readiness?
Well, we have to have proper governance control around that data collection. It is of utmost importance. So there has to be policy and legislation. And I think that in Australia, there's the smart cities policy, and it's been funded from federal government, but I don't know how I don't think that's continuing on for very much longer. But it's important that we really tackle the issue of data, of how we're collecting data on our residents and using it for good, and how are we keeping it private. So, if we want to use parking data to help people find when parking spaces are available and make that available to the public, we need to be sure that that's kept separate from whatever information we have about their infringements and their address, and that can't be hacked. So there's definitely a lot of work to do in that policy and legislation piece. And as we know, governments, through the COVID app, we're not really that great in dealing with this new technology, but we have to speed up the process. We have to get in front of that technical change.
And how do you see that happening? Do you think that would be a matter of local and state governments hiring officers to specifically, review legislation and update it, or would it be an independent body?
Oh yeah, I'm sure something like that. It would be a top-down initiative, and it would be mandated across, from the federal down to state, down to local, saying you need to have your data protected in this sort of way and tick the boxes. And yeah.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I do know, and Mads, you probably know more than I do with this, but the City of Melbourne, looking at their 5G testbed series of projects, the idea of sharing data or having data stored within, municipal data storage, and then who has rights to access that data is a really interesting thing. It's do we apply, the municipal library type way of doing things where you donate information into a public collective? Do you then start to triage certain, firewalls? Do you get people to pay for access? Do people, how does that actually start to work in the public environment when, a public provider is providing the technology to transfer and store information and even collect information. As opposed to the Sidewalk Labs piece, where they're investing in this type of technology and the data collection for commercial gain. So there's a significant IP piece that they protect. It'll be really interesting when we start to see public space and the idea of public space, who owns it, we all do, start to genuinely come into the digital sphere.
Yeah. And we're trying, I mean, every council is trying to become more digitally adept. And, at Stonington, we have a One Stonington initiative, and we want to be able for people to take photos of a sidewalk and hit send, and it comes into our systems, and we know exactly what they're looking at, and we can go out there, within a matter of hours, and we can fix that. And but in reality, that's, we don't have the technology yet to make that successful, but it's where we're headed. And then I think, there's a whole bunch of people at the council that work in data and in IT that are trying to figure out how that is stored and tracked.
Great. Just keeping an eye on the time, and we've got a number of other good questions I've lined up. What is the best way? Oh, this is a good one. What's the best way to incorporate Indigenous Australian values into a smart city?
I might just start on this, and I'm not going to to having a huge amount of experience in this area, but I think one of the other questions that you had mentioned earlier in the week, Estella, was what are the conversations that are being left out of the smart city conversation. And I think things like poverty and inequality and discrimination, not necessarily things that are topics that are have been included in the smart city conversation yet. So I think it goes back to that argument. I think that a smart city has to be more than just technology, and it has to also be about in inclusivity as well. So I think that it is it's a much sort of larger conversation than just about technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah, could I share a story from a really talented First Nations architect based in Melbourne, Jifa Greenaway, who was working on Melbourne Uni campus, and part of, if you like, this is a different version of the smart city, but understanding the heritage and history of that part of the city, what it used to be pre-settlement, what it was before, how it was, the patterns of use, not just from people using it, humans using it, but the hydrology, the fauna, the flora, all the rest of it, and the stories that were then told about that place. And again, I love these stories about hydrology within cities that have been covered up and put into drains. But effectively, it was a great story of understanding the eel migration routes through the city of Melbourne, not just Elizabeth Street, which a lot of us know is a creek or was a creek, but through that campus. And then the ability to interpret that in a contemporary way. That was part of the smart city, and it did include digital aspects to it. There are many different tools, but the smarts really came in to the ability to artfully express and translate a previous history that had been lost to a large extent into a contemporary form. And a lot of that form is actually experienced digitally, the way in which they've done that as well as physically. So I think there's a much greater depth to the way in which we need to relate to, this country, First Nations people, that should give us inspiration to be able to drive through the digital and then get to the heart of why we actually, live in cities in the first place.
It's a great example, Tim. I think it just summed up what my definition of a smart city is: taking these ancient wisdoms and using it into a contemporary form that's accessible by everybody. No, that's great. Thank you. Any others?
Well, I guess I'll just comment that it's such a great question. How do we incorporate Indigenous Australian values into smart city? Because, I think we have to start by just educating. I mean, myself has to be educated. What are those values? And there are probably so many. And the way that we operate now is just a very narrow way to look at the world. And I think that the beauty of what smart cities could offer is sort of, taking that other look and going in a different direction and saying, well, questioning again, what is definition of smart? And like, how do we want to be smart? Do we want to be smart in the way that we save time, or do we want to be smarter about the way that we respect people? Do we want to be smarter about the way we just, get to know each other and live our lives? So I think those kind of things can be more than just technology. It can be a lot about more connection.
Great, thanks, Madeline. Some really good answers. I might move on. What do you think is the relationship between smartness and resilience? Do we know what the definition of resilience is?
I think I touched on this a bit earlier, but just a really practical example, and I keep giving all these practical local government examples.
No, it's great.
We just did a review, a building, what is it called? A building resilience, or not building resilience, building like a scorecard, someone help me out. But it's on our emergency relief centers. And because we wanted to focus on those three, because we said, okay, well, if there's a huge heat wave, or if there's some other natural disaster, how are we going to help those people that need to come to our relief centers? And so this assessment said, well, you're not ready if the power goes out. You need a neighborhood battery, or your windows are all north facing and they don't have proper shade. And if you ever have hundreds of people in this building, you're going to need to do something about that. And so I think from that assessment, we're going to definitely be installing sensors on those three main emergency centers. And we're going to be collecting data and seeing how they can run more efficiently and be more resilient in that way. But then there's so much more we could do in terms of stormwater drainage, picking up those flows. I mean, floods are probably the biggest risk to resilience, I think, in Melbourne. So we need to be ready to be able to track those stormwater drainage flows a lot better.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a place where the smart city really does actually serve people, and it's where we can use the smart cities, I guess, networks that we have to deploy ideas and resources, so we can respond. We can use those systems to respond in a lot of ways, but we can also use those smart cities resources and the data flows to actually make sure that everything that we improve and build new and upgrade is done so in a better way that actually reflects what we've learned from things that have gone before. So I think this is actually an area where the smart cities, the whole concept is actually perfect for resilience.
Great, thanks, Claire. I think we've got time for one last question, and that is, what are the two most critical or pressing urban issues that can never be solved by technological solutions? It's a big question. Any takers?
I mean, I guess that's something I raised earlier, but I wonder about things like poverty and inequality and discrimination, and I do think that they are topics that are left out of the smart city debate, and and they're obviously crucial for creating good cities and good places for people to live. And I don't know how necessarily they get wrapped into the smart city conversation yet, but I hope that they do.
Yeah. I think never is a big word. It's a critical word in this question. I honestly don't think anything in human experience can go unexplained without some sort of a technological aspect to it. I mean, we've grown up with technology of any type, really. And I think what Bex touched on is, equality, diversity, the poverty, these types of things at some point will be dealt with in some way, or some solutions will be assisted with technology. I think they, to a large extent already are to it, sort of, but they're not really at the focus of our effort to make cities better. And that's really clear at the moment.
This question makes me think of the things that that really genuinely demand human interaction, and it really made me think of, I don't know why it just popped into my head, but the Minister for Loneliness in the UK. I was just like, and this is where kind of the smart cities, it can complement a solution, but it's kind of indicative of how we've kind of fast tracked down this path that perhaps wasn't entirely the right one, and we have to learn from what we've done potentially wrong in that sense. But I think that word never, I think there's always an element that technology can assist with, but it's never going to solve. And I think we've seen that across our entire lifetimes.
Yeah, and I think I'll maybe just bring it back to my original point, which is that it's about how we use this, and smart cities is an umbrella term, but maybe we've just been lazy with seeing how we could apply smart cities technology in theory. And if we start thinking broader, about in terms of equality and racism and really, cultural behavioral changes that have to be made, if we start applying the right questions, maybe, before in the implementation phase of smart cities, then we can get, different answers to these questions, and not just look at transport and climate change, which are all very important, but there are these other issues that maybe we can delve into further.
I think just on that, I think those topics Beck raised, such as poverty, discrimination, racism, they're all very very nuanced topics. And I think looking at smart cities from a technological point of view, that seems like, how can quantitative data solve these problems? That needs a much more nuanced approach. And while they can assist, as Claire, you mentioned, never is, it's a key word here. You can't just solve discrimination or solve climate change, but it can assist and to varying degrees. But no, that's great. Thank you so much for all the discussion. I'm just mindful of the time, and I think we might wrap up, unless you had anything else to add? No? Well, I think some really good takeaways here. A lot of food for thought. I think the main point I've taken away from this is the fact that looking at smart cities is a very human element, and it's a very technological element, and it's really about how do we manage these two things to achieve efficiency, resilience, healthy, happy communities and cities. But I might pass on to Justine to just conclude tonight.
Thanks, everyone. On behalf of, everyone tonight, I want to thank Claire, Madeline and Rebecca and Tim for a great discussion. I guess it was really fabulous and such a meaty topic. I'm sure we could go on and on. I wanted to give a big thank you to Simon and the University of Melbourne for their work in preparation for today and their ongoing support of ABP and the women in the industry and the alumni. So looking forward into 2021, stay tuned for upcoming events on the @WomenOfABP Instagram and LinkedIn account. Hopefully our next event will be in person, so stay tuned for that. And we do welcome any topic suggestions that you think would be good for events, which can be emailed through to University of Melbourne or anyone on the ABP committee. Thank you everyone for attending tonight, and hope you have a great night.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.